A few weeks ago now I received an email from a Mr. Andrew Dexter, who would like me to retell his story of some paranormal events that happened to himself and his family way back in 1969 in the town of Bargoed in Caerphilly County, Borough of South Wales Valleys in the UK. Without further ado, I give you the ghost of Gladstone Villa. My family and I lived at a large property called Gladstone Villa in the former mining town of Bargoed in the Caerphilly County, Borough of South Wales Valleys in the UK. From 1969 to 1978, we experienced activity that simply defied rational explanation, such as lights going off and on. We witnessed electrical cables being pulled, and my grandfather Bill claimed to have had a glass bottle thrown towards him as he entered the main bedroom, missing him by inches. I didn't personally see this myself, but I still recall the time he came from there with the broken bottle in his hands and he told us what happened. There was the occasional sighting, but this was very rare indeed. So rare that in all the 9 years I was there, I never once saw it, but I did hear it many times in the bedroom. It's still worth mentioning that my mother Caroline saw it on at least 2 occasions. There were also regular footsteps heard in the main bedroom every evening, sometimes during the day when we'd all be downstairs watching TV. One of us would turn the volume down to hear it more clearly, and my grandfather Bill would point at the ceiling and say, "He's by here, he's by there now," trying to make out where the footsteps were coming from exactly. There were 5 members of the family that were living at Gladstone Villa. My maternal grandfather William Higgs, known as Bill to family and friends, a retired miner who worked at the local colliery. He was a short bald man who liked nothing more to listen to his country and western LPs, Johnny Cash and Glenn Campbell, and so on. He also liked westerns on TV that starred John Wayne or Clint Eastwood. My maternal grandmother was Rita Higgs. She was a short woman who was a housewife. She was completely teetotal but liked to smoke. She also liked collecting garden gnomes and liked watching a soap opera on the TV. My mother, Caroline Dexter, met my father at the local bakehouse in Baldwin Street, where she worked the day shift and my father worked the night shift. He would stay behind to make her a cup of tea and have a chat. They dated for 3 years before they got married on Monday the 1st of April 1968. The Beatles were number 1 with Lady Madonna. They decided to live with my grandparents at Gladstone Villa, which was in Cardiff Road. I was born on the 24th of August in 1969, when everyone was listening to the latest number 1 in the charts, Honky Tonk Woman by the Rolling Stones. It was soon after that my mother said that strange things started to happen. I was just a baby when she said it all started off rather quietly, like small tappings here and there, but nothing too noticeable. But in time, the activity gradually increased. One time my mother said the family heard a noise, like someone jumping down from the attic and onto the landing. Naturally, thinking that someone was trying to break in, they went to see what was going on, and when they got there, they found nobody, but the hatch to the attic was open. Whatever it was eventually occupied itself in the main bedroom, which incidentally was my grandparents' room. It soon made its presence felt by walking around the bedroom, and the sounds of dragging could be heard. One day my mother went upstairs to that bedroom to get my father up for work, so he could get ready for his night shift. When she got there, she was confronted by the sight of the ironing board placed on my father's torso as he slept. When he awoke, he was astonished to find the situation he was in. He suspected my grandfather Bill was playing pranks, but in time, he knew my grandfather was not responsible for it, and he told his work friends what was going on there, and it soon got around that Gladstone Villa was haunted. My parents separated in 1972, and my father left Gladstone Villa. But it wasn't because of what was going on at Gladstone Villa, it was just a breakdown of the marriage. They finally divorced on the 25th of April 1975. The British band the Bay City Rollers were number 1 in the charts with Bye Bye Baby. Again, very apt. It would have been amusing, but for the facts of what was going on there. I was barely 2 years old, so I have no memory of my father living at Gladstone Villa. But he would come to see me every Saturday to take me to my paternal grandparents and to the local cinema. Great times, even though the paranormal activity still continued. As I got older, I too witnessed the activity for myself. I saw the electrical cables being pulled by unseen forces. I saw the lights going off and on, and when my grandfather Bill would play his records on a Sunday afternoon, it would turn the music off. It seemed to take exception to the British band Slade, and any religious TV shows my grandmother Rita would watch. The local police were also involved. I remember they were popping their heads into the attic, hesitating and not going in, but they suggested it was my father playing a prank on the family. A family friend, Mrs. Ivy France, well, she was more of a friend to my grandmother Rita, was very sceptical when my grandmother told her that Gladstone Villa was haunted. I can still remember Ivy going into the main bedroom, looking around and saying it was the vibrations from the traffic outside causing it, but she was soon to change her mind when she experienced it for herself. It was then she suggested the local press and a medium. The medium was John Matthews, and when he came to Gladstone Villa, he started by asking the family questions. He then began by challenging the spirit to perform by knocking on the ceiling, and sure enough, it responded by knocking back at him. At some point John went into a trance to try and make contact. He failed to get a name, and he later confirmed the obvious, that there was indeed a presence there, but it was an earthbound spirit, and that it had unfinished business. A priest by the name of Graham Jones was called to Gladstone Villa. He blessed the property, and after a few prayers, he duly left, and it was quiet for a few short months after that. No incidences. But it did return, and with a vengeance, and this time it decided to show itself. One evening, my grandfather Bill, my mother Caroline, and I were watching television, and my grandmother Rita was reading a book. All of a sudden my mother just so happened to look to her left, and she saw the full solid figure of a monk standing by the doorway. We did not see this, as we were otherwise occupied, but she later described it in detail as a monk in a typical brown habit, complete with hood over the head, so she didn't see the face. The description she gave sounded very much like a 16th century Benedictine monk. Fred Davis was a friend of my grandfather Bill. They worked together at the local colliery, and he would visit most evenings. Fred was a slim man who would wear a flat cap and glasses and smoked homemade cigarettes that hung from his lips when he spoke. He would sit in his favourite chair by the open fire and talk to the family and watch TV with us. One day, Fred was with us in his usual place by the open fire. I was quietly playing with my toys by the sideboard. It was quiet when all of a sudden there was a very loud bang. It was so loud that Fred ducked his head and I ran to my mother for comfort. When it was quiet, we all went upstairs. My grandfather Bill would always be first, and I would be last, and when we got to the bedroom we found nothing that would account for the noise. Fred later told us that he ducked his head down because he believed that something was going to come through the ceiling on top of him. Fred also told us of another experience he had at Gladstone Villa. My grandfather Bill liked to look out of the landing window that overlooked Cardiff Road and into Bargold town centre, and one particular day Fred joined him at the window. He said he felt something brush past him, and when he looked, there was nothing there. The most frightening experience I had was when I was alone in that particular bedroom. I made sure the light was on. It was very quiet. I was lying on the bed facing the window that overlooked Cardiff Road, when I suddenly felt something heavy pounce on the bottom of the bed. I heard the bed springs go just once, and I felt the bed bounce. I didn't look straight away, but when I did there was nothing there. I went downstairs to tell my family, and we all went back up. We saw distinctive paw marks on the bed, like that of an animal. I later found out that my grandfather Bill had a black Labrador dog called Tovey, who died before I was born. My grandfather Bill and my mother Caroline claimed to have heard a baby crying, but as I didn't hear it at the time, I took very little notice of what they said. The activity got so bad that my mother, grandmother and I slept downstairs with the lights on. It was only my grandfather Bill who wasn't afraid to sleep in the room by himself. That is until what happened next. He told us that he was lying on the bed when all of a sudden he couldn't move. He couldn't even shout out to us for help. This could well have been sleep paralysis, but he said he heard something in the room with him. My grandmother Rita also had her own experiences in that room. One day she went upstairs, into that room, to wake my grandfather. When she saw the boiler door open wide by itself, she didn't stay there to see what it was, but she rushed out of the room. On another occasion, she said she had the sensation of something pulling from under her foot, like she had stepped on someone's gown. We had the ghost for so long that my grandmother Rita gave it a pet name, and she called him Johnny. And my father Bill would shout out the name to provoke a reaction. Not long after, my mother Caroline had an operation on her foot, which resulted in her being on crutches. The local nurse would occasionally come round to tend to my mother's foot. On one particular day, as she was dressing my mother's foot, she asked politely for my mother not to hold on to her. My mother looked at my grandmother Rita in amazement, as she was not holding the nurse at all. My mother came to her own conclusions, that it was Johnny the ghost who was holding the nurse. The only time I heard the ghost being vocal was a time we were all in the same bedroom together. One of us wanted to use the bathroom, and we couldn't get in there, so we all waited in the bedroom. My grandfather suddenly said, "He's behind there." I heard, quite distinctively, the sound of a Gregorian chant, and that was it, nothing more. We left in the summer of 1978. When two local businessmen bought the property, and Gladstone Villa was eventually converted into a small hotel, and its name changed to Reds Park Hotel. On the night before we moved, there was one final incident we experienced, as if it knew we were going, and it was its way of saying goodbye. My mother, grandmother and I got ready to go to sleep. The light was still on, and then we heard the doorknob turning, as if someone was trying to get in. At first, I naturally suspected my grandfather Bill, as he was the only one who slept upstairs in that room, and we thought it may have been him playing a prank. I called out to him, but there was no answer, no laugh that would give him away. We then heard our belongings, that were packed in the hallway, being thrown around. The next day we asked my grandfather Bill if he was playing a joke, but he insisted it wasn't him, and to this very day, I believe him. I had my 40th birthday at Reds Park Hotel in August 2009 for old time's sake, and it was there the female staff told me about the ghosts, and I told them what had happened to me there 30 years before. The staff told me of their own personal experiences, lights going off and on, and the odd sighting in room 5 of a bride dressed in white. I decided to do some thorough research of the property and the Cardiff Road area, and I found out that some very interesting things happened. I found out from Bargold Library and local newspaper archives that Gladstone Villa dates back to the 1900s, and it was named after the former British Prime Minister William Gladstone. I discovered the previous people that occupied the property, the Kimmitt family, in 1924, the new married couple Michael and Evelyn Kimmitt, and their son, named Elvin Kimmitt. He died at the property just 4 months old, according to the archives of Cardiff newspaper The Western Mail. This may explain the crying baby my mother and grandfather heard in the bedroom. Mrs. Evelyn Kimmitt died in 1970, soon after I was born. Maybe this is why the activity all started. I also found that there was a monastery in Baldwin Street, where my parents met and worked, and there is a property directly opposite the former Gladstone Villa property in Cardiff Road dating back to the 16th century. It is now a public house called the Raffer Club. A priest hide is said to be in there, but is sealed up. This explains the monk my mother saw. What I have said here is true. I wouldn't share this if I couldn't possibly back this up, and I have used real names as I have nothing to hide, and all I have said can be verified by the family of those people I mentioned. Sadly,